Welcome to the Pocket Size PR podcast, the podcast where pocket-sized portions of PR wisdom are distilled by communications professionals. I'm your host, Charlotte Nichols, and owner of Harvey & Hugo, and I'm delighted to be joined by Jim Entwistle today. Jim is course leader in journalism and sports journalism at Teesside University. Did I say that right?
You did indeed.
Excellent. So Jim, please can you define PR for us?
I'll have a go. Maybe not so much of a definition, but I always think there's like a gap between how yourself or your business or your organisation is perceived and how you want it to be perceived. And I think public relations, the activity is all geared up towards closing that gap, whether that's through sort of influencing opinion or ultimately, hopefully, changing behaviours.
Oh, I love that answer. I get such different answers from everyone and they're all so accurate. I love that, closing the gap between how you're perceived and how you'd like to be perceived. Amazing. And so you're in the education industry, educating in journalism. How are you making sure the students that you're teaching now are equipped for jobs that might not even exist right now?
Yeah, I mean, that is a huge question, really. We teach journalism and sport journalism. That's what the titles of the courses are. And lots of our students do go into those fields, but many of them also go into communications roles as well.
Okay.
There's a lot of related skills, some of which are technical and are very much based in the here and now about how we're doing things. But I think fundamentally what we're trying to do is build those sort of soft skills around that give people that adaptability to cope with the future. There's so much going on out there in the industry that we need to keep on top of changes and trends.
It's tough, isn't it? Keeping up.
It really is. And you don't want to jump in with both feet to every new fad that comes around as well, because ultimately, our time with the students is relatively limited. So we need to make best use of that time. But at the same time, we don't want to be left behind as well. So it's about sort of keeping an eye on what's really valuable. But I think what you find is that, a lot of what is most valuable is those foundational skills in communication skills that, although the output might change slightly, the skills required to produce content remain the same. Yeah,
that's a really good point as well. And sometimes they're so underrated. Basic communication skills are so critical to daily life.
Yeah, and you can skip ahead and assume that students coming to us at age 18, 19 know this stuff, and quite often don't. And a lot of it is around building confidence as well. Building confidence to have conversations with people. So just developing those really basic communication skills and building confident communicators.
Yeah, are you finding the general kind of trend that people are saying is that young people aren't as skilled in conversation because they're so used to kind of communicating on their smartphones, like via text, via imagery? Do you find that to be true?
To some extent, I think that I wouldn't necessarily say that they're less skilled. They're skilled in different ways in having conversations in different methods.
Yeah.
Where I sometimes have to get a bit more active and is around getting on the phone or getting face to face with people, because I think you can manage with email, with messaging in terms of getting information out of people. But I don't think that is the optimum way to get a story.
I agree.
So when we're working in live news days, for instance, where we give the students free rein to operate as journalists, as long as they're bringing stories in, we're pretty happy, and we work with them on what they're developing. And what you'll tend to find is, and you probably get this with some working journalists, although I'm not going to point any fingers, but is that it's easier to send off an email and wait for the response to come back. Now that response may never come, as your inbox fills up, and it's really difficult to get that, to get round to it sometimes. But even if it does come around, that response, through email, it's so, been scripted and structured, and it's often detached from the human.
Absolutely.
If you can get on the phone to someone, not only are you going to get a better response, but you're building that human connection with people for future stories as well.
Totally agree. And we always say that. And you're getting the personality, but they also might tease out some extra information that you just wouldn't have got out of an email.
Yeah. That's right. And I actually, and this probably sounds really cold and callous, but like I try to get people on the phone in the classroom. I remember being terrified, in my first few weeks in the Northern Echo newsroom of being like, being so self-conscious on the phone of people listening to my conversation. But the sooner you get over that, the better.
Absolutely.
And I would never push anyone to do anything that they were, deeply anxious about. But at the same time, I had a situation, they were reporting on a storm that hit Teesside, and one of them got on the phone in the end and made a phone call to the fire service. And the elation that they got at having spoken to someone and having got a statement, and there was a round of applause amongst the classmates, which was actually totally organic. And I was like, well, that's a lovely moment,
Yeah.
And next time they'll go and just do that straight away. So.
Oh, yeah, I agree. I remember making my first calls, and some of them were maybe to even you at the Northern Echo at the time. And I was literally terrified pitching a story to a journalist.
Well, I'm not surprised.
I know you're very scary. Actually, you were one of the really lovely ones, but there were some very scary ones at the time.
Indeed, yeah.
And they probably weren't. It was just my young person's perception of the world. But it's true. You've just got to push your comfort zones. And I think what a lot of young people don't realise is that a lot of people are deeply anxious. Yes, sometimes it comes easier to others, but outwardly I seem to be quite outgoing, but still I dreaded making those phone calls. It just has to be kind of done and pushed through.
Yeah, and still to this day, it's not something I would ever relish as such.
Yes.
But I've developed mechanisms through which I'm just able to get over this stuff and just get it done. Because ultimately, I've got a job to do and I need to get that.
Yes, thinking about the end goal.
And that motivates me more than anything else.
Definitely. And like you say, for that student, when you do get a really good result at the end of it, it's such a buzz.
That's right.
So
yeah,
brilliant. Well, I'm glad you're pushing them to use the phone in a kind way.
Yeah.
So how do you stay up to date with future trends in your industry? Because like you say, there's so much going on all the time.
Yeah.
Do you have certain kind of sources that you go to, or do you do courses?
So, I have a load of amazing colleagues who are doing really interesting research in communications. Great. And, a lot of it's through conversation around, with former colleagues and friends who work in the industry.
Yeah.
I like to make those calls as well. I like to get on the phone to people. I like to be in regular communication and find out how people are getting on. And not in a sort of cynical way, trying to glean information, but just to keep in touch with people. So I think there's a sort of organic element to keeping in touch with what's current. I do a lot of reading, whether that's through academic journals, things like the Digital Journalism Journal, which is really really current. They publish regularly, and things like the Neiman Lab. Reuters Institute, who are sort of pulling together best practice and current trends across the world, really. So I'm fortunate enough that as part of my job, I'm given time to read and research this sort of stuff. So, as I said at the start, it's about sort of understanding what's going on out there, and then sort of deciding how best we can filter that back down to the students, what's useful for them, and just pointing them in the right direction, really.
Yeah, that makes sense. And obviously you're in higher education. How critical is PR activity to promote kind of the university?
It's huge, really, and I'm having come from a journalism background into, I did 10 years in public relations as well. It's a huge advantage for me to be able to go into a teaching role now. I'm now course leader for journalism and sport journalism, and we have a responsibility to make sure that the numbers of students coming onto our courses is at sustainable levels, basically, at the very minimum. So those public relations skills are vital, really. From a course perspective, I'm able to use those skills that I've developed over the years and those contacts over the years to try and promote what we do in order to, attract the next generation of journalists. So I think, I look at it like I'm very much still in public relations. Although I'm teaching, and I'm teaching journalism, I do some public relations tutoring as well, but I'm there to advocate for the students and for the course. So, a lot of what I do is connecting up students to opportunities, and that's using the same set of skills that that I've had when I worked at the Great North Air Ambulance Service or even the Northern Echo.
Yes.
You know, that really it's about sort of joining the dots. And I think that's a lot of what public relations is. You know, I don't want to sort of oversimplify what we do, but it's about identifying an opportunity or a risk and, you know, often just connecting different people and facilitating the solution.
Yeah, absolutely. Relationships are at the heart of it always. And I like how you say that you're still in PR, because I think PR is critical to any role. Even if someone's got no experience in it, they're all representing the brand that they're working for, and all of their actions, the things they say, the body language, how they dress, it creates those perceptions. So, you know, everyone has almost a PR responsibility, but I just think a lot of people aren't aware that they do.
Yeah, absolutely that. And, you know, one of the greatest things you can do in PR is identifying those people early who you're working with, who perhaps don't work in the communications function, but who are very good communicators.
Yeah.
And if they're your allies really in any organisation. You know, when I used to work at the air ambulance, you know, there were certain doctors and paramedics and pilots who were just exceptional communicators. You know, far better than I would be sat here on this microphone. You know, they would speak with eloquence and expertise around their subject. So it was just about finding opportunities for them to speak.
Yeah, no, brilliant.
And giving them the sort of ammunition you needed, you know, to deploy.
To build their personal brand as well.
That's right, yeah. And look, I did like a Chartered Institute course in public relations about halfway through my career in PR. And a lot of it I was like, oh, you know, I didn't know the name for that, but we're doing that anyway. Do you know what I mean? I mean, there was some incredible stuff I learned. That was up at Sunderland University with the CIPR, actually.
Yes.
And you know, hugely beneficial for me. But a lot of it is sort of natural, I think, what you're doing, isn't it?
Yeah, and it comes more natural to others, you know, compared to some other people.
Sure, but spotting that talent or that skill in other people is one of the skills in itself. Because then, you know, you're sort of bringing that to the fore.
Absolutely. Really good point there. And so how has journalism changed since you started out in it?
Well, you know, I mean, the production element of it has probably changed hugely. You know, I've been out of journalism for about direct journalism. You know, I used to work in the newsroom at the Northern Echo about 15 years ago now. Okay. And I think that the output is obviously relatively similar in the fact that they're producing, you know, articles and videos, but the way that news is gathered has changed considerably and continues to evolve. So you know, we used to have, you know, probably a lot more of a reporting staff. We had a lot more time to develop stories. We probably had a lot more freedom to develop the sort of stories that we wanted to work on as well. Whereas now, you know, there's a lot more pressure. Things are working in a different way. A lot more sort of data-driven stories as well.
Absolutely.
So I think the news production pipeline has changed probably massively. But ultimately, you know, it's still about producing high-impact content, and I still think there's a big market for that.
Definitely. Sometimes high impact content for clicks, you know, because clicks lead to advertising and revenue. Yeah. And, you know, I sometimes do fear for the future of quality journalism. Is that something you think about?
I do think about it, and it's a difficult one as someone who, you know, is leading a group of young students through their journey into the media.
Yes.
And I don't really see it as my job necessarily to dictate to them what is good and bad journalism as such.
Okay.
I think it's about developing students with a critical eye who, you know, are aware of how the industry works and aware of the ethical pros and cons of certain situations and certain types of journalism. But there are a lot of opportunities for young people to go into journalism in roles that, you know, I might very personally think that's a bit dubious, but is it dubious, or is it a decent way into the industry? You know, so I think, I'm wanting to produce clearly students who are ready to make an impact in at the top levels of journalism. Yeah. But it's a difficult industry to break into. and there are many routes into it. And look, if who am I to say if that writing opportunity is better than the other one?
Of course. I think one of my main issues is trust, the quality of the content in terms of validity, with so much kind of, I don't know, the fake news thing online and where they find the sources. How are you trying to monitor that?
Well, yeah, I mean, trust and authenticity. And one of the big concerns is, I guess, that, in the rush for clicks, that, ultimately you are degrading your brand and that trust. But we're also seeing a lot of, aside from legacy media, we're seeing a lot of emerging news brands coming out as well.
True.
So I think it's almost like democratized media to some degree.
Yeah.
One of the things that we encourage is sort of entrepreneurialism and students actually setting up their own news brands.
Oh, brilliant.
And that's not turning the back on these on the legacy media, which, there's still some brilliant opportunities out there, and they're still doing fantastic work in a lot of areas. But just showing students that actually, they've got everything they need to be producing themselves, and some of them already are. I have a student in the third year who's about to graduate, who's got an audience of 100,000 writing about football. Do you know what I mean? And he's done that. He's developed that himself.
That's
I'm not taking any credit for that, but we sort of are there to support him in doing that, and he's almost ready to go as soon as he finishes. So it's like they can be doing that whilst they're studying. So that's really what we're trying to encourage, and then they can sort of develop that ethical understanding as they're going along as well.
Yeah, there's so much opportunity now that you can create your own channel, your own news stations. Then that leads to so much noise out there, and then it's even harder to create content that's going to stand out. And then there's so much kind of niche content, which I think is brilliant. Even if you look at podcasts, there's a podcast for every single topic from every single perspective you could think of. But then, and I think that's brilliant too. But then on the other side, it could lead to people living in echo chambers almost. I like this news station. It's what I want to hear all the time, rather than that broader, like hearing things they don't want to hear, which I think is important. Yeah. So it's interesting.
Yeah, it is. And it's one thing that sort of infuriates me about the news that's presented to me is the way that it's curated in a way that I have no real control over often. I turn my phone off. I've sort of personally fairly switched off from social media to some degree.
I did that with Facebook for those reasons.
Yeah. And I don't find it that helpful. I've actually personally, I've sort of moved to news that's a little bit more considered, and I think I've become more of a weekly newspaper man than a daily, because I like that sort of idea that ideas and concepts can be allowed to develop, and then and then presented with a little bit of breathing space in between, rather than just sort of everything coming straight away.
Yeah, immediate, because they have to meet demand for that, but then it isn't as considered.
That's right. Yeah, and I think that what we're seeing in the media is that actually, going back sort of 15 years when I sort of left work in the newsroom, we were sort of grappling with where we should be going, and no one really knew. Everyone was trying to understand where the best way forward was, and I think there's signs that a lot of legacy media is actually getting to grips with that now.
Yes.
And I think that what we're seeing is, like, look at the Times, where they're reporting some pretty impressive growth numbers in terms of their digital subscribers, in terms of their profits. They're actually doing well. I subscribe to the Times Digital. I subscribe to the Financial Times. I think they produce really high quality content.
Absolutely. You don't mind paying for it, do you, when it's quality?
You don't. And then magazines like The Fence. I don't know if you know The Fence, but that comes out I think it comes out once every 2 months. Some really high quality writing.
Brilliant.
On a diverse range of subjects, but it's a lightweight magazine that comes out that you can just sit and read in the bath. You know what I mean? And it's just like, and it's considered, it's really strong writing, and it's just entertaining at times and hard hitting at other times, and it's what journalism should be.
Yeah, perfect. I'd have to check that one out. And then talking about journalism, how important, or what is the role that almost local media can play in this globalized world that we live in?
Yeah, I mean, it's significant, and that'd be where my fear would be. Although I think that there are opportunities there as well. There's research been carried out recently into court reporting, for instance, and the decline in the number of newspapers covering court. Now, I think we're fairly lucky in our area that the likes of the Northern Echo and the Gazette are pretty strong.
Yes.
But overall, we're seeing a decline in the number of court cases being reported on in local news, and that obviously has implications on how justice is seen to be done.
Yes, yeah.
We need journalists there to make sure that the courts are operating responsibly and properly.
That's true.
And it's the same with councils as well.
Mm-hmm.
And with the decline in number of local journalists that we've seen, are these institutions really being held to account? And that's the big concern. But what we're starting to see elsewhere in the world through developments in AI is that there's new ways of reporting on these meetings and these hearings that could potentially sort of open these institutions back up to the public again.
Yeah.
So, but the public's got to be interested, and that's the other thing is there's got to be, the public have got to be prepared to pay for this stuff, and that's the big problem, isn't it?
It always is, and then people voice, "Oh, we want it; it's important," but they're not often paying, as you say.
No.
And if there's a small local story and then there's a massive global thing, obviously they'd rather flock to that content.
Yeah, but and I think it's not all about sort of calling out wrongdoing in local press. I think there's a really sort of undervalued aspect of it, which is building that sense of community, and those sort of shining a light on achievement in the community, which was something that we used to be really big on, was, and I'm not saying they're not still today, but just, going out and speaking to, golden wedding anniversaries and going out to school sports and agricultural shows and whatever else it is. And I think it bonds people together.
I agree.
And I think that, going back to your point about the echo chamber, I think it starts to break that down. If you see how other pockets of society live.
Yes.
And, you can share in that celebration with them. I think that's a good thing. And that, so I think that would be sorely missed, I think, if that was to go.
I do agree with that sense of community that it builds. And it's, in a way, I think sometimes AI, with, the way it's rapidly growing and it is so globalized, it could almost drive more success in the regionals and local because they feel like they're disconnected.
I can see that. Scenario unfolding. I was doing a house renovation a couple of years ago, and at the back of one of the fireplaces was an old Yorkshire Post.
I love it when you find things like that.
It's brilliant.
Treasure.
Yeah. And so I immediately took a 2-hour tea break and read the thing, and it was the amount of information in this thing. It was one edition from the day after a storm, and they were the amount of reporters that had fed into this. They'd had basically a reporter in every town in Yorkshire or in every village in Yorkshire, feeding in the impact. And you think, God, the work that's gone into that. There's articles about who'd been at which parties and, which ships were arriving into Middlesbrough that day. And, and it's just like the detail is significant. And I think that, that's been replaced, through other means to some degree. But I would hate to see it being lost altogether.
No, I don't think people appreciate detail these days in this fast-paced world. Sometimes I actually wonder if they read more than 2 paragraphs past the headline. That they're so busy, and don't get me wrong, sometimes I'm guilty of that as well.
Yeah.
They kind of will just glance at it or scan it. They feel like they've got the general sentiment and general message, but sometimes there are messages lost in the detail. Yeah,
absolutely. And that's, we need to make time to absorb this information, I think, because it is important. You want citizens who are engaged in the society in which they live, and I think that's a risk of that we're facing with people not.
Yeah, and just caring enough to dig a bit deeper sometimes. And so do you think newspapers, you've already mentioned the Times is increasing its profits, do you think they will ever make a comeback in terms of almost like the printed versions?
I mean, you know, the News of the World used to sell 8 million copies. You know, the Sun, the Mail, they 3, 4, 5 million a day. You know, that's not coming back, is it? I don't envisage a scenario in which that happens. But that's not to say that these brands can't thrive
in other ways.
And I think that they are. I think that they are adjusting.
It's been slow though.
It has been slow, yeah, and there's been lots of blood spilled really, but I think that there's a way forward, and I think that the public has to value this stuff. You know, the public has to be prepared to put the hand in the pocket and pay for it at some point, because you can get certain information out there for free, but it's can you rely upon that?
Yeah. I kind of always believe that you get what you pay for in life, and that quality journalism you do have to pay, I think.
Yeah.
It's a shame, but the people need to earn a living.
Well, they do, and then when you've got the large social media companies out there sort of scraping information and presenting it back to the audiences, I mean that's really undermining a lot of what local news is doing. So yeah, there has to be a fair settlement for local media if it's gonna thrive.
Yeah. Brilliant. I could talk to you all day, Jim. It's so interesting, but we're going to have to end, and we're going to end on what is your top PR tip?
My top PR tip would be to invest time in people, and developing relationships. Going back to what we said at the start about getting on the phone to people, I think any success I've had in my career has been down to the fact that I've spoken to people and I've developed relationships. And I think unless you actually prioritize that, then you're going to miss out. And I think even now as a teacher, a lot of the opportunities that I'm able to, work with my students on is because, we're out there building bridges with other people in the community. So, but in order to do that, you need to be making contact with people face to face or on the phone.
Real, genuine human contact.
Yeah, that's absolutely critical.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Jim.
Okay, thank you.